She woke to find a stranger's shoe on her pillow, a blunt, silent accusation that made her throat close. Marisol sat bolt upright, the room tilting for a second as the shoe stared back like proof that the night's safety had been borrowed and not returned. Her hands searched the bedspread as if it might whisper why she had been chosen. Marisol had never believed that small moments could contain entire lives, but lately little things had become freighted with meaning. At 31, she ran a small community mental health clinic on the East Side, scheduling appointments, doing paperwork, and teaching boundary-setting workshops for survivors. She was meticulous, warm in a way that felt professional rather than indulgent. People trusted her because she listened without flinching. Yet who listened for her when the listening burned? She had come home late after a workshop about manipulative relationships. The night had been full of stapled notes, coffee stains on handouts, and the quiet satisfaction of helping someone name how they were being gaslit. She had fallen asleep on the couch, the TV playing a grainy documentary about cults. The irony nearly made her laugh in her sleep. She remembered closing her eyes and thinking, for a calculating second, that empathy sometimes felt expensive. Now, with a single anonymous shoe on her pillow, that thought was a hornet in her chest. She checked the windows and the lock, even the small kitchen door that led to the alley. Everything sealed, tidy, unblemished. The shoe was real. How it had arrived, she could not say. An automated voicemail from the clinic pinged her phone, a client asking for more help. The day ahead formed like a set of obligations she had promised herself she would keep. She dressed quickly, coffee cooling in a chipped mug, and stepped out into a city that smelled faintly of rain. The clinic's waiting room smelled of lemon sanitizer and cheap coffee. Troy at the desk gave her the look he reserved for people who had held too many private storms. "You okay?" he asked, toward the shoe in the tote she carried. She told him, and his mouth flattened. "Security shows nothing at 2 in the morning," he said. "No one on footage." She ran the day anyway. Intakes, a group session on boundary setting, calls with legal aid. In community work, she often moved through other people's emergency like a surgeon with delicate instruments, steady hands, unsentimental compassion. When Claire in group described the way a partner would reward attention only after long stretches of punishment, Marisol reframed the pattern from blame to power dynamics. People breathed easier when someone spoke the system aloud. But the shoe lay in her bag like a splinter she could not pick out. At lunch, a volunteer, Malik, teased her about haunted inboxes, and for a moment she laughed. Words were armor. Humor made things less raw. Later, a teenager named Danny arrived at the clinic under a referral. The girl's eyes darted like trapped birds. Danny's story smelled familiar, trust weaponized, affection used as currency, boundaries trafficked for control. Marisol sat with the girl and spoke slowly, giving words like tools. The work energized her and drained her in the same breath. At 3 in the afternoon, her phone buzzed with an unknown number. The message read, "You fix others. Who fixes you?" The line felt like a warm blade pressed to her ribs. Someone watched her patterns, her routines, the spaces where she softened. It was unnerving to realize that the very things she taught survivors to notice, small incursions, tests of loyalty, tiny manipulations, were being used now against her. She tightened some boundaries that evening. She wrote rules on a small index card. No after-hours drop-ins. Double verification for emergencies. Require escorts to and from shelters when risk flagged. The active listing felt like a rope across a canyon. Priya, her roommate, found the note and folded it into a hand that tried to be both gentle and firm. "You have to report this," Priya said. "Someone is testing you." "That's harassment." Marisol called the police. The officer was polite in the way people are when they want to preserve the distance between official duty and private terror. He took the report, stamped a sticker on the file, and handed her a pamphlet about community resources. The response felt like a bandage where stitches were needed. She left the station with a small bureaucratic proof that the world knew something was wrong, but not enough to stop it. That night, she sat on the narrow balcony and watched a woman across the street pull an umbrella from a stroller. Her mind, trained to spot patterns, found itself cataloging faces again, trying to see who might slip a shoe through a window or note a habit that could be used later. When she closed her eyes, she saw Danny's shaking hands, Claire's furtive glances, the woman who had once thanked Marisol with tears and then returned to a controlling partner. Empathy, she recognized, was not simply feeling. For manipulators, it was currency. The more she gave, the more leverage they might buy. She dreamed of rooms with brass handles opening onto empty corridors. She woke to a new message, a photo of the clinic entrance at night with a smear across the glass and the caption, "You left the window open for them." The smear could be bird, finger smudge, accident, yet the message felt like accusation, an attempt to make her doubt her competence even as she doubled down on precaution. In the days that followed, small sabotage occurred. A volunteer's car keyed in the parking lot, a file mislabeled so a client's appointment was missed, a rumor half-formed about the clinic's funding. Each incident peeled at her assumption that competence alone kept people safe. The note and the shoe had been early signals. The later acts were tests of whether she would blink. Marisol revised policies. She asked for cameras to be rechecked, required two-person escorts for certain clients, and made her desktop notes less personal. Each shift toward structure felt like a necessary armor. But in quiet moments, she worried about what she taught, that empathy could be wielded and therefore needed protection. She had always believed giving could be an act of strength. Now she had to teach giving and shoring up at the same time. One midnight, the building's hallway filled with the smell of smoke. A candle had been left burning in a neighbor's apartment. Thin flames licked a curtain. Marisol and Priya reacted fast, smothering the blaze and calling the fire brigade. The incident left a char across the stairwell and a tremor in Marisol's hands. She realized then that perpetrators didn't only use psychology to unmoor people, they used physical risk to thin the edges of vigilance and provoke panic. She sat at her kitchen table with a lamp and a notebook of rules. She wrote until the words blurred: boundaries, security, referrals, supports. At the top, she wrote one phrase large and decisive: care, not collapse. She would continue to help, she decided, but she would learn to protect the thing she gave. Empathy needn't be a door flung open without lock. It could be a bridge with checkpoints and a map. Outside, city lights glanced against rain-streaked glass. Marisol placed the anonymous shoe in a small evidence box and locked it in her desk. It felt like a talisman and a threat both. She inhaled and imagined the clinic as a container, strong walls and clear rules, a place where survivors could learn to reclaim power without someone else reclaiming them. The manipulator's tactic was clear: use tenderness to enter. Her job now was to teach how tenderness could also contain boundaries. She would not stop listening, but she would stop being the unattended doorway. The rain started before dawn, rattling the window like a soft warning. Marisol sat at her kitchen table with her laptop open but unused. She'd been staring at the login screen for 15 minutes, unable to decide whether to type the clinic's security incident report or to close the computer and pretend she still had a normal life. Her coffee had gone cold again. Priya entered, hair messy, blanket wrapped like a scarf. "You didn't sleep," she said gently. It wasn't a question. "No," Marisol answered. I keep thinking whoever is behind this knows the clinic I sent did just a job for me. They're trying to pull that string. Priya placed a hand on her shoulder. Then don't give them the string. Don't let them decide how you use your empathy. The words settled in Marisol's chest like a promise she wanted to keep but wasn't too sure she could. At 8, she grabbed her raincoat and left for the clinic. The city muted under a steady drizzle. The waiting room was fuller than usual. Mondays always were. The coffee machine hissed. The faint smell of wet coats and sanitizer mixed in the air. Malik gave her a worried nod from behind the desk. "We had another anonymous call last night," he said quietly. No words, just breathing. Then they hung up. Marisol's heart clenched, but she kept her voice even. "We'll document it and increase call trace requests. Don't answer unknown numbers alone." She moved through the day with deliberate focus. A group therapy session with women learning to rebuild boundaries after abusive relationships. A one-on-one with Danny, the teenager whose trust had been broken early and often. Marisol listened, guided, offered small steps forward. These sessions usually fed her sense of purpose, but today every story felt like an echo of her own growing vulnerability. Late in the afternoon, a new client arrived. The intake form read, "Evan Pierce, 35, referred by probation officer." He came in with a damp hooded jacket and a polite smile that didn't reach his eyes. Marisol met him in the small office, painted soft green for calmness. She introduced herself, offered tea, noted how his gaze drifted around the room as though measuring it. "I'm here because they told me to come," he said, shrugging. "Said I need to talk about anger issues. Do you feel you have anger issues?" She asked. "People always say I push too hard. I just understand what makes people tick." His smile twitched. "And I use it." Something about the way he said it, too casual, as if confessing a fond hobby, pricked at Marisol's nerves. She kept her tone neutral, guiding the conversation toward accountability. But she felt his attention shift to her reactions as if he were cataloging them. By the end of the session, she made a mental note. Keep professional distance. Involve her supervisor early. That evening, as the clinic emptied and the rain lightened, Marisol lingered to finish paperwork. The corridors felt longer, the shadows at the corners darker. She heard the faint squeak of sneakers down the hall, but found no one when she checked. On her way out, she noticed an envelope taped to the inside of the clinic's front glass door. Her stomach dropped. She peeled it off carefully and opened it under the street lamp outside. Inside was a single photo, herself in the clinic office that afternoon, leaning forward, listening to Evan. The angle suggested it had been taken through the small window in the office door. Beneath the photo, written in neat ink, "You let them in too easily." She stood still under the rain, hard hammering, staring at the words until the ink blurred. Someone wanted to make her question her own strength, to twist her empathy into a liability. At home, Priya waited with takeout soup and quiet eyes. Marisol showed her the photo. Priya's expression hardened. "You're reporting this tonight." Marisol agreed, though she knew the police could do little with anonymous photos and vague threats. Still, filing the report felt like placing a stone on one side of the scale, some small weight of accountability. The next morning, Marisol met with her supervisor, Ruth, who had worked in community services for decades and carried herself like a tree that had weathered many storms. Ruth listened carefully, then said, "You know as well as I do that some people exploit the open doors we create. We keep the doors open, but we learn to build better locks. Doesn't it ever get to you?" Marisol asked softly. Ruth smiled faintly. "Of course it does. That's why we learn boundaries. They aren't walls to keep people out. They're gates that remind us we choose what to let in." The words steadied Marisol. That afternoon, during Danny's session, She focused on teaching the girls small practical boundaries, how to say no without apology, how to identify subtle manipulations. For the first time in days, she felt that her experience of being targeted gave her more insight, not less. When the clinic closed that evening, she double-checked the locks, walked home with Priya, and tried to believe that safety was still a reachable state. But at 2 in the morning, her phone buzzed. A new message lit up the dark room. "You're good at teaching then. Let's see how you handle being taught." A small video file followed, the camera angle from the end of her building's hallway, showing her apartment door. Her hands shook as she clutched the phone. Fear pressed in like the heavy rain outside. But beneath it, a quieter, more solid feeling stirred, anger. Whoever was doing this wanted her to feel hunted. She would not let them write her story. She saved the video, locked her phone, and sat at the table with her notebook. In bold letters, she wrote at the top of a new page, "We name what we face." Naming is the first defense. Then, carefully, she began listing patterns, incidents, times, places, the small map of a manipulator's moves. The night stretched on, but as the first pale light of dawn crept into the room, Marisol felt something like resolve anchor in her chest. She didn't know yet who was behind the threats, but she knew she would not face them as a silent target. She would face them as someone who understood the psychology of those who twist empathy and refuse to let them win. The following week unfurled like a drawn-out wire tense, humming with unseen current. Marisol worked her sessions at the clinic with disciplined calm, but a sliver of her attention was always elsewhere, the unseen watcher behind the messages. The police had logged the photo and video as evidence, yet offered no real reassurance. "We'll increase patrols near your building," the officer had said, tone professional but weary. That meant Marisol and Priya still checked the hallway twice before leaving the apartment and kept the chain locked whenever they were inside. At the clinic, Malik greeted her with a fresh frown on Tuesday morning. "We got an email overnight. No sender name." Sighed. "Good hearts can't see the traps they build for themselves. IT says it came through a VPN. They can't trace it." Marisol thanked him for reporting it and took a slow breath. She'd expected escalation, but the impersonal cruelty in that line still scraped her nerves. She led a trauma processing group that morning. As she guided the participants through grounding techniques, she felt a strange clarity. The same tools she taught naming sensations, tracing triggers, staying present were the tools she needed to keep herself balanced. In the afternoon, Evan returned for his second session. He entered quietly, hood down this time, hair slicked back as if he'd made an effort to look approachable. "Better week?" Marisol asked as they sat. Evan's lips curved. "Depends on what you call better. I'm noticing things about people I didn't before, like what makes them flinch? What makes them say yes?" His gaze lingered on her face, searching for reaction. She kept her expression neutral. "What you notice can be used to connect or to manipulate. Which one do you want it to be?" He chuckled softly. "You always give me choices." "Most people don't." The conversation moved in circles, Evan probing, Marisol steering back toward self-reflection. When he left, she felt the faint ache of mental fatigue, as though she'd spent the hour deflecting invisible darts. That night, Priya coaxed her into watching an old comedy show to unwind. They laughed at silly punchlines, but just as Marisol began to feel the tension ease, her phone buzzed again. A single message. "He enjoys the game." "Do you?" No sender ID. Her throat tightened. Whoever was tormenting her not only knew about her sessions with Evan, but hinted at intimacy as if sharing a private joke. She reported it to the police and to Ruth the next morning. Ruth's eyes darkened. We'll adjust protocols. Malik will accompany you during late sessions. You are not alone in this. The support helped, but the feeling of being watched never quite left. On Thursday, during a community outreach event at a local youth center, Marisol spoke to a room of teenagers about resilience, how understanding emotions could be a shield against manipulation. She told a story about a girl who once believed every apology from a harmful friend until she learned to trust patterns over words. As she talked, she noticed a man leaning against the back wall, not part of the staff, listening intently. He was in his 30s, baseball cap pulled low, hands in pockets. When her eyes met his, he gave a slight tilt of his head, neither friendly nor hostile, just aware. When the talk ended and the teens shuffled out, she scanned for him again, but he was gone. That evening, as she walked home under a silver-streaked dusk sky, she felt the subtle drag of footsteps echoing behind hers on the quiet street. She glanced back. A man in a dark jacket turned casually into a side street as if on his own errand. Maybe coincidence, maybe not. At the apartment, Priya noticed the tension in her shoulders. You're coming apart inside, aren't you? Marisol sat heavily on the couch. Whoever it is, they're always one step ahead. I'm afraid of making a mistake that puts you in danger. Priya reached for her hand. You can't let the fear isolate you. That's part of their tactic. We're in this together. Marisol felt a surge of gratitude, then an idea sparked. Maybe that's it. They think they know how to control the game. But if we start observing them the way they observe us, patterns, timing, we take back some power. That night, they set up a discreet camera by their apartment door and another facing the hallway. Priya, practical and steady, cataloged each suspicious message, printing and dating them. Marisol added notes in her careful handwriting, possible connections, behavior patterns, details of Evan's sessions. Friday's session with Evan brought a new unease. He spoke about his childhood, how his father taught him to hunt by teaching him to study the smallest movement of animals. You watch where they drink, how they freeze when they sense danger. You wait until they step into the open. His voice softened, almost fond. People aren't so different. Marisol kept her pen still against the notebook. You seem to have learned observation as survival. But survival is different from control. Evan tilted his head. Maybe, or maybe it's the same skill, just a different choice of prey. For a fleeting second, she thought she saw something flicker in his eyes, recognition, amusement, as if he knew about the messages she'd been receiving. But when she looked harder, his face was unreadable. That night, the new camera by the apartment door recorded movement at 3:12 am, a shadow pausing briefly outside, too blurred to identify, then disappearing down the hall. Marisol watched the footage the next morning with a steady but cold anger. They're circling, testing how far they can go. Priya handed her a mug of tea. We'll give the video to the police, and we'll keep watching. Saturday brought a brief reprieve. Marisol met Ruth for lunch at a small cafe. They sat by the window while rain pattered softly on the awning. Ruth spoke about her early years in the field, about cases that had haunted her and the lessons they'd taught. You fight shadows with steadiness, Ruth said, stirring her tea. And you remember that the person trying to control you is often more desperate than powerful. The words resonated. Marisol realized that beneath the fear, she'd begun to feel something new, a resolve to reclaim the narrative. That evening, as twilight folded over the city, Marisol opened her notebook and wrote, I will not be reduced to prey. Understanding the predator is part of disarming them. She didn't yet know how close the predator had drawn, but she felt the first quiet spark of counter-strategy. Marisol barely slept after reviewing the hallway footage for the third time. The shadow had paused as if listening, almost breathing in the air beneath their door before slipping away. She'd replayed the clip frame by frame, her jaw tightening each time. By Sunday morning, a pale dawn cut through her blinds. She forced herself to get up, shower, and eat a few bites of toast. Priya was still asleep on the couch after their late-night strategy talk. Marisol glanced at her friend, feeling a pang of gratitude. This ordeal might have hollowed her without Priya's steady presence. At the clinic that afternoon, the air felt heavy, as if charged. Malik handed her a folder. "We pulled the visitor logs for the past 2 weeks," he said. "Nothing unusual on paper, but I noticed Evan stays longer in the lobby after sessions, just standing there sometimes." She tucked that piece of information into her mental puzzle box and moved through her appointments. Most clients brought their pain and hopes with familiar vulnerability, but each session also reminded her that trust could be fragile and misused. Her final session of the day was with Evan. He arrived 5 minutes early, hands shoved deep into his pockets, expression unreadable. When he sat down, he didn't wait for her opening question. "You ever wonder what makes someone cross the line?" he asked softly, like not just think about something dark, but do it. Marisol held his gaze steadily. "I think it's often a mixed pain, opportunity, sometimes the belief that no one's really watching." Evan tilted his head. "What if they know someone is watching, but they like it?" A ripple of unease passed through her, but she didn't show it. That would say more about control than survival. He smiled faintly. "You're good at naming things." They worked through his recent experiences, his growing awareness of subtle ways he influenced others. She guided him toward accountability, challenging him to see the difference between understanding people and manipulating them. But she left the session with an unsettled pulse thrumming at the base of her throat. That night, while Priya cooked dinner, Marisol checked her phone and froze. A new message glowed on the screen. A cage can be built from kindness, too. Her stomach nodded. She showed it to Priya, who muttered something sharp under her breath and grabbed her laptop to log the message into their growing file. "Does he want you to second-guess even your compassion?" Priya asked. "He's trying to twist it against you." Marisol nodded slowly. "It's like he wants to erode the one thing that anchors me, the part that still believes in helping people." Priya put a warm hand on her shoulder. "Then we make it your armor, not your weakness." Tuesday morning brought unexpected news. The police had identified a potential link. The anonymous emails to the clinic and Marisol's threatening texts originated from the same foreign server used in a cyber harassment case last year. But the trail had gone cold then, and might again. Ruth summoned Marisol into her office that afternoon. "I know you don't like feeling watched," Ruth said, "but we've installed additional cameras at the clinic's back entrance. You and Malik will coordinate your arrivals and departures. And if Evan says anything that feels like a confession, you call me right away." Marisol agreed. She felt the net closing, not on the predator, but around her own movements. Still, a thin strand of resolve held her upright. That evening, Marisol found herself pacing her apartment. Priya sat cross-legged on the floor, sorting through the printed messages, arranging them by date and theme. "See this?" Priya pointed at a pattern. "Every message after a session with Evan gets more personal, almost like he's responding." Marisol exhaled, slow and steady. "I've thought about that, but it's too soon to accuse. If he's the one behind this, pushing him could make things worse." Priya glanced up. "And if he's not? Then someone else is listening to us, which might be even worse." On Wednesday, Marisol led a group therapy circle at a women's shelter. The participants shared stories of being manipulated by partners, by family, by people they trusted. Their pain was raw, but their resilience glimmered in the way they supported one another. Marisol felt her own spine straighten as she listened. She realized she was no longer only reacting to the threat. She was studying it, understanding how it thrived on isolation and silence. She ended the session by telling them, "No one loses their worth just because someone else misused their kindness." Those words lingered in her mind as she drove home. They were meant for the women in the group, but they resonated as a reminder to herself. That night, sleep came in jagged fragments. In one dream, she stood in the clinic hallway, the walls humming as if alive. A door creaked open behind her, but when she turned, there was only the empty chair from her office. She woke with a gasp at 3:07 a.m., heart hammering. In the silence, she noticed Priya's faint breathing in the next room. The ordinary sound anchored her. She reached for her phone, almost expecting another message. None. The screen's soft glow felt like temporary peace. Thursday's session with Evan began with silence. He seemed lost in thought, eyes fixed on a distant point. Finally, he said, "Do you think some people invite harm? Not on purpose, but like, they have a softness predators can smell." Marisol thought of the text about kindness being a cage. She kept her voice steady. "I think some people mistake empathy for weakness. But it's not the target's fault if someone decides to exploit it." Evan nodded slowly, as if weighing her words. "Sometimes I wonder if I'm studying people too closely. Like I can't stop watching how they react." She didn't reply right away, choosing instead to let the silence stretch. In that stillness, his gaze flicked to her, curious and almost vulnerable. By the end of the session, she felt an unexpected shift, an inkling that Evan might be as much a pawn as a threat, though she couldn't yet prove it. That evening, she received another message. No words this time. Just a photo of her clinic window taken from outside in the twilight, her own silhouette visible as she adjusted the blinds. Her breath caught. Whoever it was had been standing near enough to capture her unseen. She forwarded the photo to the detective handling her case, then sat quietly on the edge of the bed. The shadows of the room felt closer than before. Priya came to the doorway. "We'll get through this, Mars." Marisol nodded, gripping the phone. She felt the tremor in her hand, but also the slow burning core of resolve beneath it. For the first time since the messages began, she whispered to herself, "I'm not going to let you write this story for me." Sunday evening arrived with the weight of a gathering storm. Clouds pressed low over the city as Marisol sat at her desk, staring at the printed photo of her silhouette in the clinic window. She traced the edge of the paper with her thumb, her thoughts looping through each message, each subtle escalation. Priya set a fresh cup of tea beside her. "You're close," she said quietly. "You can feel it, can't you?" Marisol nodded, eyes still on the photo. "Whoever's doing this wants me to react. They've built their power on being unseen. I think it's time we change that." The next day, she met Detective Ortiz at the precinct. They went over the photo and the latest camera footage. "Whoever this is," Ortiz said, "they're confident. But we may have a chance. If they're escalating, they might slip. We can set a controlled bait." Marisol's pulse quickened. "Bait? You mean using me?" Ortiz met her gaze evenly. "You've been the focus all along, but we won't put you at risk. We'll coordinate every step," she agreed warily. She was done being cornered in the dark. Tuesday's session with Evan held a new tension. He entered calmly, but seemed to watch her more than usual, as if searching for cracks in her composure. Halfway through the session, she shifted the topic. "You've spoken about noticing what makes people flinch. What about noticing what makes them fight back?" His brow furrowed slightly. "Most people don't. They just fold. That's why predators get away with so much. And if they didn't fold?" He hesitated, then gave a small, almost rueful smile. Then the game ends. Marisol held his gaze a moment longer than usual. In that instant, she sensed a line being drawn not of accusation, but of understanding. That night, the police helped set the plan in motion. A decoy email was sent from Marisol's clinic account to her personal address, an innocuous-sounding message about a follow-up session in the evening. Cameras were readied. Officers stationed discreetly near the clinic entrance. Marisol sat with Priya in the apartment, the silence punctuated by the soft hum of the heater. Her phone buzzed around 10:14 p.m., a new message. "Some doors are better left unlocked." Priya leaned forward. "He's biting." Marisol exhaled, her mind steady despite the churn in her stomach. Then maybe it's time to shut the right one. Wednesday evening came gray and damp. Marisol stayed late at the clinic under police watch, reviewing case notes at her desk while Malik lingered in the reception area. The hallway felt too still, the hum of fluorescent lights louder than usual. At 8:37 p.m., the back door camera caught movement. A figure in a hooded jacket approaching quietly, glancing at the windows. Ortiz's voice came over the earpiece in Marisol's ear. "We see him." "Stay where you are." The door handle rattled faintly, then a soft, slow knock. Marisol rose, heart hammering but hands steady. She moved toward the door, not to open it, but to let her shadow fall across the frosted glass panel. The figure lingered, then tried the handle again. That was when the officers moved in, two from the rear entrance, one from the side alley. The figure turned to flee but stumbled as the officers closed in. Minutes later, Ortiz stepped into Marisol's office, removing his cab. "We've got him." Marisol released a shaky breath. "Who is he?" "Name's Darren Hawley. Used to do freelance tech work. Records show he once attended a community talk you gave 2 years ago. Guess he fixated." She felt a mix of revulsion and relief. Not Evan, not a phantom. A man who had tried to turn her empathy into his weapon. The days that followed were a blur of reports, statements, and slow exhalations. Priya stayed by her side, often reminding her to eat and rest. Ruth offered her time off, but Marisol returned to work within a week, insisting that the routine itself was part of reclaiming her ground. On her first day back, she stood before a new group of clients' people, carrying their own invisible battles. She began with words that had shaped her through the ordeal. "Empathy is not a weakness," she said gently but firmly. "It's a strength that can't be stolen if you choose where to place it." In the back of the room, Evan sat quietly, eyes lowered, listening. When the session ended, he stayed behind just long enough to say, "I think I understand now." About choice, Marisol nodded. Understanding is the first step to changing the pattern. That night, as she walked home under a clean, crisp sky, she felt the air settle in her lungs as if it, too, had been freed. The city's noises, the distant hum of traffic, the rustle of leaves sounded like ordinary life again, not threats. Priya met her at the apartment door with a small, crooked smile. "See, you wrote your own ending." Marisol smiled back. "And it's not really an ending. Just a better beginning." Marisol's journey shows how even in the face of manipulation and fear, understanding human behavior can become a shield instead of a trap. If this story gripped you, subscribe now, share it with friends, and leave a comment about which moment kept you on edge the most. Your support helps us bring more powerful, human-driven stories to light.